This is a big one. We want to talk about food and food choices. Not eating before bed is maybe one of the most important things that I can say here, how that's going to impact things down the line. So
what is that? How does that impact your circadian rhythm and melatonin production? And how does that impact it?
So again, our body is primed to operate with the solar cycle, right? So in other words, when the sun's highest in the sky, my digestion is typically going to be the strongest, right? And so cortisol, of course, has a time when in the morning, right? It's going to boost up in the morning and it's going to wane. Now, if all of this is a mess and my hormones are firing at different times and our cortisol is weak and it's inverted and melatonin's all over the place, now inherently the way my body functions is not going to be optimal. So I'm already at a disadvantage. Now, if I start layering things like eating food at 9 p.m., particularly, big, heavy, fatty, dense meals, my digestion's weak. It's not optimized, right? The hormones that are needed to sort of process that food and metabolically utilize that energy is not going to be optimized. So I'm not going to be able to pull glucose out of the blood very well. I'm not going to get it put it into cells very well. My metabolization is not going to be optimized. The ability for the liver to do its job and detoxify, and gallbladder to release bile acids. Everything about the digestive process is not going to be good. It's not going to be optimized. So those foods are not going to get broken down. They're going to create an environment in the stomach, in the small intestine, and the large intestine that's going to be more toward putrefaction as opposed to digestion, more towards things just kind of stagnating, right? In fact, just the migrating motor complex that moves through food through the digestive tract is not going to be optimized. So now we're going to have food sitting in this tube, not really doing as much as it could, and it's going to start becoming this putrefaction factory, right? It's not going to end up well. That creates an overgrowth of certain bacteria that are not optimal for health. It's going to create more lipopolysaccharide release. It's going to create leaky gut. It's going to create more inflammatory markers in the digestive tract. And then outside of the digestive tract, in the whole system, we're going to get elevated markers throughout the body. So it's just going to lead to this degradation of the actual GI system as a whole. Everything's going to get more inflamed. And again, it's this downward spiral of function, right? So once we start getting all of this stuff, this is what can lead to things like SIBO. This is what can lead to things like, any inflammatory bowel disease. All these things that we don't want are going to happen, right? So, and again, at night, what we want, if we don't have a belly and a gut full of food to process, because that's a big, people don't realize how much energy is required to process food, right? So imagine you only have so much resource and you're dedicating 40% of it to digesting a huge meal. And instead, the body's what it really wants to do is start cleaning up and preparing for the next day. It wants to start turning over cells and processing certain hormones, right, through the liver and detoxing the body naturally, right? So there's a process that the body's wanting to get into, and we're saying, no, don't do that. Here, I got this big bowl of ice cream and some pizza for you. Like, handle that, right? So not only is it a tough food in general, but it wants to do a different task. So we're preventing it from doing the cleanup tasks, and we're giving it another job to do. So now, not only is that other job adding to the pile, we're actually not even able to clear the pile that's built up. So it's like saying, don't clean up your house, let's just keep adding more trash. And eventually it's just going to result in some kind of symptom, some kind of diagnosis, some kind of issue. And it can be anything. It can end up being joint pains. It can end up being brain fog. You just don't know what it's going to end up being.
Just driving up all the inflammatory pathways.
Everything.
And I think this is, I wanted to finish on that because I think this is really key because, I'm a huge advocate of intermittent fasting, and a lot of people that follow me or listening to this are practicing a level of intermittent fasting. And a lot of people kind of fall into this idea of like, I'm just going to fast all day and I'll eat a huge meal at night. Right. But like what Jason is saying here, you could really be throwing off your circadian rhythm. That's not the ideal time. I mean, obviously, everybody's schedule is a little bit different, but based on our circadian rhythm, it's better to have your compressed eating window, getting the benefits of intermittent fasting, but consuming those meals while the sun's in the sky.
Yeah, so you're hitting on something really, really interesting, and I think the reason that we've fallen into this trap of skipping breakfast, eating kind of like a moderate, mediocre lunch, maybe kind of a nice salad with some other things there and some protein, and then we have this like nice big meal. Or a lot of people are just doing one meal a day, and it's not that one meal a day is bad. It's just you're right. It's the window at which we're throwing it into. Now, why are we doing that? It's because of our culture. Right. Most of us work during the day, and then we want to have a meal. We want to share a meal with our family. And that's the time when we eat our big meal. So culturally, it's appropriate, but biologically, it's actually inappropriate. It's more right. It's really the optimal window for those heavy digestible meals is probably about from 11 a.m. to 2 or 3 p.m. That's the window that you have good blood sugar control. You've got good insulin regulation. You've got good digestive capacity, and digestive capacity is the number one factor for, I would say, processing a meal effectively. In other words, if we're eating too often and eating too much, we don't have the digestive juice. We don't have the hydrochloric acid. We don't have the digestive enzymes. We don't have the ability for the liver to do its job. We lose the capacity to digest food. In Ayurveda, they call this, well, we won't go into that. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But the idea is that when we are hungry, that's when, this is something that I think we really want to get in touch with again. What is hunger? What is real hunger? And these little pangs that we get can often be resolved by drinking 16 ounces of water, right? They can be resolved by going for a walk. They can be resolved a number of different ways as opposed to just having another snack or another meal. And so if someone's looking to change their life and their relationship with food, this is a relationship I think it's worth exploring is hunger. Get into hunger, feel that hunger. And when you go into that meal, you should be ravenous and hungry. And that's so good. Every bite you take, every food that you eat will taste better, right? Your body will be able to process it better, right? So I totally agree that if you're one that has the capacity and the ability based on your lifestyle to eat either maybe it's a later breakfast and maybe it's a large later lunch, right? So you can, this idea of breakfast, lunch, dinner can be totally thrown out, right? This is a cultural thing. It is not set in stone based on our biology, right?
Totally.
So
and I do one meal on Wednesdays, and I eat a big lunch on Wednesdays, usually somewhere between 1 and 2 o'clock. And I sit with, in fact, I usually make dinner for my family and I sit there with them. And honestly, I'm really not hungry. And I've eaten a good amount of protein, satiating foods, and sleep, prioritizing sleep really helps with that, like you were talking about. And then you kind of get into this process where you're very metabolically flexible. And so my body almost craves that, I do it roughly about a 24-hour fast once a week. When I get to that point, it's almost like my body knows the signal. It's like, okay, I'm not even going to be hungry. The first few times I did it, I was hungry. I felt kind of those feelings because I had trained my body to say, hey, this is the time of day where we eat. And now my body kind of knows periodically we don't eat dinner.
That's right.
And this is where I'm going to put all my energy now into healing and repair. And I'm actually going to take away hunger and cravings because I know how beneficial this is. Tapping into the innate intelligence. And of course, I'm programming it right by getting the proper amount of light exposure, getting the proper amount of sleep. And then the lunch that I eat is very blood sugar stabilizing. It's not, there's no processed foods in there. It's higher in protein and fiber and polyphenols and healthy fats. And so that helps train my body to where fasting through dinner, and I'm watching all my kids eat, I'm, chopping up food for them and whatnot, and my wife, and yet I'm able to enjoy the company without actually needing to eat.
And that's the thing. You hit on something really important there, which is this process of kind of going through it, right? So you work with a lot of people that have, blood sugar control issues, right? They might be hypoglycemic, right? That's another one where for a hypoglycemic, I wouldn't say just start intermittent fasting. That's going to be a disaster, right? There's a process to evolve and to become more adapted, right? And so again, this is where the invitation is to explore that sort of that hunger edge for you. Right? Like, where is that? Right. And you might get to this point where you're like, geez, I'm really hungry. But there's generally a point that you feel like you need to eat, and it's actually not as bad. You haven't been to that edge yet in a while. And so once you get to that edge, then you can play with that for a little bit, and then you can push beyond it, right? And so it may look like if you're used to eating 3, 4, maybe even 5 sort of meal snacks a day, you start cutting back some of those, and your body's going to send those signals like, hey, it's snack time. Remember, like we're supposed to have snack time. And then you push through that, and then you get to lunch, and then you're a little bit more hungry than usual. Well, that's gonna modify and adapt as you become more metabolically flexible, right? So this is what I think is really important. Yes, there's differences in constitution, right? There's certain people that actually do better with fasting for longer periods, and certain people that don't do as well. I'm kind of in the middle, I've discovered. And there's certain people that don't really do great with long periods of fast. They can do it, but it's just not optimal for them. So maybe it's like a 12 or 14 hour window consistently that's really good. But these windows of time are really important where the body has the capacity to do other things and digest food, right? And maybe you figure it takes 2 to 3 hours to fully digest a meal if you're doing it right. That means if you're chewing your food thoroughly and all this stuff.
I mean, sometimes longer depending on the size.
Totally.
Totally.
And you
4
can
to
track
6
this
hours.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
You can track this with blood sugar monitors and other ways as well, heart rate variability. There's all kinds of things that you can actually check this stuff and see how food's affecting you. But as your body gets better at that, you're going to have more adaptability, more flexibility, and you can find your window. But that time where the body is not dealing with food, the brain is sharper, right? Again, once it's adapted, you have more energy, your mood is more stable, you're able to detox. Like that is the key to longevity, is giving your body these windows, but it's critical that you're doing the other things right as well. Yeah. You got to get the circadian rhythm right and the sleep right, or what we're talking about here is going to seem impossible. When I was sleep deprived with my little one, if I was trying to do this stuff, I could do it, but actually I might be really moody, right? Yeah. Or I might be, just unable to effectively push through and get the things done that I needed to get done, right? Like you may lose,
and you may not really get the health benefits of it.
That's right.
It's kind of like exercise. Exercise is, most people, if you say, hey, is exercise healthy? They're going to say, oh yeah, of course it's healthy. Right. But if you look at it under a microscope, I mean, it's extremely catabolic and damaging to the tissues of our body. It's really the recovery process. That's really where we heal. And so it's kind of like we want to hit the right window where we're challenging our body, this kind of getting this hormetic stress benefit, but not overtraining. So, when you add your newborn, your training level, I know I experienced this, the intensity level of my exercise when we're not in a newborn stage versus, we've gone through with our twins and then my 2 daughters, 3 newborn stages. And, the intensity level of my exercise, if I tried to do the same intensity level and the same frequency of exercise during that newborn stage when my sleep wasn't good, it's actually worse for my body to some degree than not exercising at all.
Yep, exactly. And this is where maybe it's a good point to end on, which is that like where I think most of us in the modern world can start to explore more are at the extremes. In other words, push yourself in the extreme and rest in the extreme. Yeah. Right. So and most of us are eating too much and too frequently. So what's the other extreme? Well, we need a little more time off of food. So occasionally I'll do let's say a 3 or 5 day, juice, I call it juice feasting. In other words, I'm drinking tons of juice. I'm getting actually some calories. I'm not it's not a fast per se, but there's no physical material that I'm eating, but that's still, it's a catabolic, it's a hormetic process, and I got to be gentle on my body. Now, could I go do exercise and, we can do that. We can do 10 days of fasting and still perform exercises, no question. But the real benefits, I think, are when we do something like that. Maybe a 24-hour fast is extreme for you. Take it easy that day. Don't push yourself. Rest, meditate, pray, relax, lay down, go outside, go for a light walk, right? Like these are the things that I think I invite people to explore more. And this is, if you want to look at what people in the longevity regions of the world, how they lived, it was at the extremes. They got extreme heat, exposed to extreme heat because they didn't have central heating or central cooling. They got exposed to extreme cold because they didn't have central heating. They had fires, right? They lived directly by the circadian rhythm. They didn't have lighting for most of their lives. They didn't have electricity for most of their lives. And And they went long periods of time, often, to be honest, in maybe the more severe damaging effect, they didn't have food many times. For months or years, they went without food because of certain government rationing and wars and things that were going on. So they went through extremes. Now, I'm not saying we should do that, but we can invite a little bit more of this extreme nature of cold therapy and hot therapy, right? In saunas, of getting good periods of fasting and good periods of total rest and pushing our bodies a little bit more. When was the last time you sprinted, right? When was the last time you really, really used your body to its full capacity, right? Start pushing some of these things wherever you're at. That looks different, but that's where we're going to start to really gain the benefits, because the extreme side tends to be where the body's starting to push and adapt and create more resilience and more adaptations that are positive, that are sort of this anti-fragile aspect of who we are, right? And then the rest side is where we recover, right? Without that severe, significant rest, and again, the insides, your digestive tract recovers when there's no food. Your microbiome diversity improves and blossoms when there's no food, right? Detoxification and autophagy and mitophagy and all the recycling of proteins and all the getting rid of the waste happens when there's no barrier, when there's nothing else for that system to do except for start to clean up, right? Go into the extreme sleep, so to speak, like get really good at sleep, right? And the actual sleep architecture, right? These are really important aspects. And so, again, what I see in our modern world is that we live in this constantly controlled 72 degrees Fahrenheit environment all year round. It's the same lighting all year round, right? We don't we're not dipping into the extremes as much, right? We're constantly feeding. We don't go through feast and famine on a daily level or a seasonal level, right? Everything's just kind of the same. And so that is creating a bit of a weakness in our constitution. And so and again, you can even apply this to our immune system. We need to get sick. In other words, I wouldn't even say sick. We need to be challenged by organisms in our environment, right? And you can even make this case for things like radiation, right? In fact, we know that from the sun, but even some of this other radiation that we might get from, let's say, Fukushima type of things. There's actually research showing that small amounts of this sort of radiation, small amounts of chemicals can be beneficial because they're exerting this hormetic effect. They're creating an adaptive capacity. Now, again, some chemicals at even the micro level are toxic and even more toxic. So I don't want to open that can of worms, but the concept is such that we need to expose ourselves to the environment. We are stronger than we really realize. We are more adaptable. And when we get the core foundations right, like getting good sleep, like having a good social environment, like moving on a regular basis, like eating good, high quality foods at the right time and digesting our food, now we can encounter our environment. We can resist it. We can be strengthened by it as opposed to taken down by it, right? So it's this sort of like resilience and fortitude that we're building. And this is kind of the chiropractic model, really. I wasn't trained as a chiropractor, but everything I know about chiropractic, it's like this is kind of what we're talking about, is building this resilience through kind of this engagement with our environment, as opposed to building a bubble around us, right? Like that's not the way we do this.